Dallas Cowboys All-Pro right guard Zack Martin is back with the team. How quickly can we expect him to ramp up his practice work? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, the Dallas Cowboys have officially brought back Zack Martin after reaching a contract extension, a new deal, whatever you want to call it. How excited are you that Zack Martin's back?
We were in negotiations late into the night last night on whether I would be coming back today or not. So I also received $8 million in new money and $18 million guaranteed the next two seasons. So
work on a new contract.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be reporting that Zack Martin is back. And obviously it's very exciting, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, so the official numbers are still waiting to come out, but it sounds like Zack Martin got a pretty decent raise. Was it $18 million per year over the next 2 years, and fully guaranteed, which for me is great. I mean, he got a nice raise. He's still not even the highest paid guard in the league. He's not even the second highest paid guard in the league. But it also, it locks him into being here for the next 2 years, which I got to be honest, it's something that I'm always a little worried about year to year after the Travis Frederick situation. Like, how long can we expect him to play? I think it's awesome that we know he's going to be here, obviously, this year and next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you and I were never nervous about this situation specifically, but I think we were hoping that it would be resolved in a kind of amicable way, because we not only wanted Zack Martin back for this season, but for the future. So the fact that they were able to kind of sort it out and frankly, in a manner that we all kind of anticipated is not shocking. But I think it was a little surprising how long it lasted. I think the Cowboys felt like they needed to play a little bit of hardball here just to make it clear that, hey guys, not everybody is eligible for a raise 2 years with 2 years left in their contract. So, but I also think that they understood that Zack Martin is, one of those guys who is likely the exception. So I think the Cowboys had to play kind of a delicate balance here from a front office standpoint, right? They had to look willing to give raises to guys who have earned it, but they also had to kind of keep a tough front in the fact that, hey, you signed a contract, you need to stick to it until the contract is up. They can't have, middle class tier of players coming to them wanting raises with 2 years left on their deal. And so I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody got what they want. Zack Martin's back in the fold with plenty of time to get ready for New York. Happy days are here again.
You know why I wasn't really worried about this whole situation? It's because it's freaking Zack Martin. I'm like, you're going to figure out Zack Martin, a Hall of Fame guard. I saw some discussion on Twitter yesterday that the Cowboys caved again in negotiations, and this is what they do. They talk big, and the player ultimately wins. And I get that, right? Like, Zack Martin had 2 years left in his deal. He got a raise, and he really didn't have to give up anything. At the same time, I still think the Cowboys won because you're not paying Zack Martin as the highest paid guard in football right now. And again, I'm going to mention this again, not even the second highest paid guard, and that you've locked him in for the next 2 years, knowing that he's going to be here. It really does feel like a win-win on both sides.
The other way to look at it too is that the Cowboys got 4 years of cheap relative Zack Martin money. So they already saved their money, on a lot of this deal. So look, I mean, not every deal's got to be about winners and losers. I think this is a situation that the Cowboys were happy to give him this money. I think, the
Cowboys could have played hardball here. Like, they absolutely could have played hardball, continue to let Zack Martin sit out in accrue fines, right? But what's the goal here? Is the goal to win, have $2 million more of cap space and have your all-pro guard not be ready for week one and get hurt? Or it's the goal to be ready to go and try to win a Super Bowl and make sure that you have everything aligned and ready to go? Because to me, that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. I mean, again, the Cowboys got their guard and the Zack Martin got his money. Both sides should be thrilled about this. everyone should be happy about this. There shouldn't have to be like the Cowboys lost.
We don't have to do winners and losers here.
We don't have to do that here. No. Like, I mean, it's Zack Martin is the exception to the rule. I think Mina Kimes kind of put it best, right? Like, you know, it felt like the Cowboys had to do this just to kind of make sure that everyone understood what the situation is. But it also was a case where it's Zack Martin. You're not letting him go. You're giving him what he wants. So, I don't think that was ever at risk. And the fact that the Cowboys were going to give him more money was always going to happen, in my opinion.
All right, a couple things really quickly. Zack Martin has been working with our guy Duke Manyweather, getting ready. So it's not like he's just been sitting on his couch eating cheese balls or whatever, right? Like he's ready to go. So my question for you is, how quickly do you think we'll see the Cowboys ramp up his practice work?
Well, it's funny because you said like earlier when you were talking about whether or not he would be back for week 1, you said it's Zack freaking Martin. That's my same answer for how quickly he'll be ready to play against the Giants. I mean, it's Zack freaking Martin. He could roll out of his bed and take on Dexter Lawrence, I think, tomorrow if he needed to. So I think, you know, he came back in with plenty of time. He's been working with Duke this whole time.
They're not even back in Dallas yet, are they?
Yeah, no, they still have 2 more. They still have this week of practice, and they fly back to Dallas after the preseason game this weekend. So there'll be 2 more padded practices today and Wednesday. I would be surprised if Zack was padded for either of those,
unless he's just doing individual stuff, right?
Maybe. Yeah, I guess I should rephrase that. I wouldn't be surprised if he was in pads at one of these 2 practices. I would be surprised if he did a regular amount of stuff. Maybe he works into individual or team stuff like with a rep or 2 tomorrow. But I would be shocked if he did anything out of the ordinary today. More than likely, they'll wait until they get back into Dallas to kind of start really, really ramping him up.
The last thing here before we move on. Obviously, he's back at right guard, which is fantastic. You have Tyler Smith playing left guard, Tyron Smith at left tackle. Saw some, again, I'm going to keep saying this. I've seen some people on Twitter really worry about the Cowboys' offensive line depth, and they want them to go out and sign somebody right now. I think you and I are on the same page here. Like, at this stage in camp, I want to just continue to see Awesome Richards play. I want to see him get more left guard snaps. I want to see maybe Matt Farniak at center. I just don't know if there's a rush to make a move now, especially now that you're working Zack Martin back in your lineup.
Yeah, I mean, like, what's the benefit of getting a guy now? You know, like the benefit of getting an offensive lineman now that likely will probably be available on the other side of cutdowns. And I'll go even a step further. Don't you think there will be better options on the other side of cutdown? So,
well, I saw like Justin Pugh, who is 33, coming off a torn ACL, said he's ready to play. Do I need to sign Justin Pugh right now?
Why? Yeah,
I'd rather just see Awesome Richards play.
Yeah, exactly. The point of this right now is to get your team ready to play and see what you've got. Those last 2 weeks before we go to New York and the ramp up there in Dallas, like maybe that's when you can consider it. But I'm not signing any veteran offensive lineman until after cutdowns. First of all, let's see who gets cut. Like there's a likelihood that you have better options on the side, and also it's a progress stopper, like you've mentioned. Like what's the point of getting them into training camp, bringing them out to Oxnard, having them take reps when you still want to see what you want to see from let's go Richards, Farniak, and some of these down roster guys. I also want to kind of back up a little bit. I feel like there has been, and you and I discussed this before the show, it feels like there is a feeling going around that the offensive line didn't play very well in the preseason game. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Like, I think if you add in all the context of what was going on, the fact that this is a complete backup offensive line, including a left tackle who had barely taken any left tackle snaps before starting at left tackle in a preseason game, I thought they availed themselves very well. And frankly, like you mentioned, if you're not sure about how they did, go ask Jacksonville fans about how they feel about their defensive line right now. So I tend to think that there's a little bit of panic going on when I thought I saw a lot of good tape for some of these down roster offensive linemen who seemingly to me are finally kind of getting it and actually putting a better tape than what we've seen in training camp. Now is not the time to put guys in front of them and put progress stoppers in front of them. Let's see how far they can go. Like if they can go all the way to the point where they're the guys that you're subbing in, that's great. But if not, then you can go sign someone. But don't put a cap on them right now.
I think you can make a case that the offensive line as a whole or as a unit might have struggled, but I don't think the guys that are going to actually be on the 53-man roster struggled, right? And that's just the challenge of preseason, right? It's to find the guys that actually mattered and that are actually going to play. How did they perform? Like Austin Richards, like Matt Waletzko, like Matt Farniak. I thought those guys were all pretty good. Some of them were better than others, but I'm not worried about the offensive line depth now. If you are, you can go sign somebody later on. When did the Cowboys sign Jason Peters last year? It was like first week of September before the game even started, right?
Yep.
That's when you go out and sign a guy.
Yeah.
So.
And again, I like you said, these are all backups. Each one of those starting five guys, like that would never be your starting five. You know, you're thinking, you're looking at whether one of those individual five might have to sub in with the rest of your starters. That's a terrible situation. You would never start these five guys together. No. So I think that's the other thing is that, you know, offensive line is a weak link system. So it would definitely help having these guys individually playing next to the starters if they had to sub into a regular season game.
All right, Landon, let's talk about some of the positional battles that the Cowboys have going on and how it's changed since we've got some action in the preseason. We will do that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or you're scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you the players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us in this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. This week, it's Dak Prescott. You guys know him. Are you looking for a safe quarterback to take after waiting on the position? Then you can ride with Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott, who, when he's healthy and when he gets enough volume, is as great as it comes. He's a perfect fit in your fantasy lineup. Prescott is going to be even more efficient with Mike McCarthy calling plays. And they've got a ton of weapons now with Brandon Cooks, an emerging star in Jake Ferguson, and of course, CeeDee Lamb. Dallas also won't be as run heavy as they were last year, restoring Prescott's solid numbers through the air. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championships. And eBay Motors knows that a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. The same is true with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories available for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it, and they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car because eBay Guaranteed Fit knows exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank that AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. And let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day, as we're going to break down the Cowboys practice tomorrow. They have a fun practice here coming up. They'll be back in pads after just doing a walkthrough yesterday. Landon, let's talk about some positional battles. We're going to start with the tight end spot. We saw Jake Ferguson play really well. We saw Luke Schoonmaker play at least a little bit. How do you see that tight end position shaking out now?
Well, it's really interesting now, right? Like it felt like it was very clear lines defined before. You have, Schoonmaker who came, coming in on a list. So it clearly paved a way for Ferguson to be tight end one. You're going to see a lot of Hendershot. You hope it's when Schoonmaker did it again. When Schoonmaker showed up that he would be able to work in his tight end three. And then you've got this guy who is this. I should also throw in Sean McEwen. You also have a guy named Ian Bunting who's also in the mix. And then you had this guy who was a converted wide receiver, undrafted free agent named John Stevens Jr. His dad was a professional running back, played for at the time the Redskins. Back in the day, Nate John Stevens was, I think, rookie of the year, if I'm not mistaken, and then kind of fell off after some knee trouble, if I'm not mistaken. So you had this list, and it was very clearly defined. And now suddenly you've gone in through training camp. You've had, or not all the way through, but the first few weeks of training camp, you've gotten into the first preseason game, and it seems like it's completely shaken up. Obviously, Ferguson has done nothing but elevate his game. He has clearly shown that he is tight end one and that he is separating from the pack. You've seen him show parts of his game that I didn't know. I think I didn't know were there before. And so I'm, very big arrows up on Ferguson right now. I do think he looks like a guy who could come in here and take the Dalton Schultz share of targets
passing
this
game
year,
work,
and
at least,
yeah,
right?
and work well. I mean, obviously he may be a step up as a blocker as well. Like, so there could be a chance that Ferguson is, could develop by the middle of the season.
I just worry about the lack of consistency. That's the only thing. That's just a position where you need to play a lot. And luckily for him, to his credit, like he just had a bunch of snaps at Wisconsin. So maybe he's a little bit more ready than we think.
Yeah. And honestly, I think with the consistency, it was more about the receiving consistency than it was for me about the blocking. So I tend to think that I'm hopeful here. He hasn't gotten a ton of reps, right? Like just overall for a guy that's about to be the starter at tight end. But the reps that he's had, he's been extremely efficient and converted most of them. So that's tight end one, right? Everything beneath that has become muddied at this point, right?
I 100% agree.
Hendershot has had a good but not great camp. And beneath him, you've seen John Stevens just absolutely light up the second and third team whenever he was on there. He scored touchdowns in training camp. He's become a red zone weapon. He comes into this game and has a couple of really great catches, including a touchdown. And I have to think that now suddenly he's in this conversation between him and Hendershot because they're very similar type players, right? And now Schoonmaker is kind of popped up to tight end too, because that he's going to be on the team at this point, right? They're not going to cut Schoonmaker. And now it's become this, and then on top of that, Sean McEwen had kind of a very uneven, if not just bad preseason.
He just didn't play well. Yeah.
And so it's become very muddied, right? Stevens, Hendershot, McEwen, all kind of in this nebulous area. You know that you're going to keep some of these guys, but you're not exactly sure how it's going to suss out a little bit.
Yep.
How much does Hendershot get to rely on the goodwill of last season to propel him into this team? I think we still need to see a little bit more. We saw some from him early on, but he's got to start making plays if he's going to kind of keep pace with what John Stevens is doing beneath him.
100% agree. I think the first two are locked in. Schoonmaker's going to be the number 2 tight end on the team just because of draft capital and because
of the usage, right? Because just how you use a tight end too, I imagine that he'll fit that role better, right? So,
and I'm going to assume they keep 4 tight ends on the active roster because they basically did that for most of last year. So you got three tight ends competing for 2 spots, right? Of the 3, John Stevens, Peyton Hendershot, and Sean McEwen, who would you say is the best blocker of those 3?
McEwen normally, right? But
normally he just had a bad.
But he has not blocked well. That's the real issue. Is that
they also ask him to do some other blocking stuff that I don't think they would
absolutely
because they were playing him as a fullback and you're not going to put John Stevens and Peyton Hendershot there. So he did not block well, but he also had a harder task than I think those other 2 had.
In some ways, absolutely. But at the same time, you got to catch that pass out in the flat when it hits you both in the hands. Like that's the problem, right? Is that like, okay, I'm going to grade you on a curve with the blocking because your assignments are tougher, but you got to do all the little stuff right, And I'll even take a step back to throw another monkey wrench in here. Look, I'm not, even though I'm the guy who tracked formations at training camp a couple of years ago, I don't know if we want to put too much stock into this, but the Cowboys played, I think, something like 23% plus 4 wide receiver sets the other night.
Yeah.
Is there a chance that this team doesn't keep 4 tight ends?
Yes.
Is there a chance that they go 3 and then, we see that McEwen role gets handed to Lupke and they keep an extra running back and they keep an extra wide receiver? Because that's the other conversation that hey, we can get into that right now. The wide receiver situation is having the other problem, right? Where they've got too many guys that are making plays and showing you something and not enough numbers on that spot, right? So I do wonder if a change in philosophy a little bit might mean, 1 less tight end, maybe on the active game day roster, right? And then try to stash somebody on the practice squad a little bit.
I agree. As you were talking, I just thought, is there a chance they just go 5 receivers this year with
Could be
Tolbert and Turpin being 4 and 5, And then they kind of view like Stevens as the guy that could play a little receiver if they needed to, but also could be that last tight end on your roster. And maybe you keep him as tight end 3. You keep an extra running back that can also be a fullback like Lipke. And we just see them go 5 receivers, 3 tight ends. And that's how we see going forward, because you've got to, with as many defensive guys as they have and as deep as they are at defensive back and at linebacker and on the defensive line, maybe offense is where we see them cut significantly back from previous years.
I mean, this is a coach who has a history of using offensive players like that, right? As a more of an offensive weapon category than, traditional running back, wide receiver, tight end situation. So I wouldn't be totally shocked if they went that route. They're going to have to do something to, facilitate the number of defensive players that they're going to want to keep, right? And so that means that they can't go long at tight end, wide receiver, and running back.
No,
one of those spots is going to have to go short.
I don't think you can keep 10 wide receivers and tight ends combined on this team. There's just no way, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to go short at one of those positions. And I keep coming back to, if Ferguson is your tight end 1 and Schoonmaker is your tight end 2, the tight end 3 has got to be somebody who can block, right?
Yeah.
He's got to be somebody who can block as a fullback.
And special teams.
And play special teams.
Yeah.
So which tight end is that? Is it Stevens? Probably not, just because
he doesn't have the experience in doing all that stuff.
Right. McEwen does, but he's also the least sexy of the group, and he's probably a guy that you could stash in the practice squad. Is Peyton Hendershot's blocking good enough to do that? If the answer is no, maybe they go out and grab another tight end that can actually fill the kind of role. Those kind of guys will be available after cutdown days.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, but as it stands right now, I think there's a better chance that Hendershot has a Cowboys uniform this year. I'm sorry, that McEwen has a Cowboys uniform this year than Hendershot, simply because I think McEwen you could stash in the practice squad. I don't know if you, I mean, we always say that, but I don't know if you could stash Hendershot. Like, I think if you cut Hendershot, he might actually
probably played enough. But again, he, like McEwen, he was an undrafted free agent, so there wasn't a bunch of teams that were interested in him either. We'll see. That tight end spot, I'm really interested to see what happens. Lane, let's talk about the other side of the ball, the linebacker and the defensive back battle next. All right, Landon, if we're trying to go short on offense, it's really because there's so much talent on defense. Let's start with the linebacker position, because, man, I'm fascinated by this. We talked about Damone Clark and Overshawn on yesterday's podcast. So if you want to hear us talk about those guys, go check it out. But what do you think happens at the bottom of this position battle?
I mean, this is a position that, we had concerns going into the training camp. Do we have enough depth? Are we going to have to go out and get a veteran linebacker? That is not the issue anymore. Not especially after this game. The linebackers, there were too many good playing linebackers, frankly, and so what it's going to come down to is what's going to happen to the Jabril Cox. I think you got to throw in Malik Jefferson's name in here. And Devin Harper, because I feel like those 3 guys are probably playing for one spot, right? And they're all slightly different kind of players, right? Like, I think Cox and Harper are very similar in the fact that they're speed demons who I think will be extremely valuable on special teams. Jefferson's different because he's a different guy. He's a different physical guy. He's a little bit
much
more
bigger.
He's a much more of a Mike linebacker type. He seems like a more natural backup for someone like Leighton Vander Esch as opposed to the will linebacker spot. So, does that give him any kind of advantage? Obviously, he's injured now, so that's also going to play into some things a little bit. But it does feel like the competition at the bottom of the linebacker depth chart has really started to heat up, and a lot of it is probably going to end up being who's the special teams ace, and if Jabril Cox can't find a way to carve out a spot on defense or to show better play on defense, like kind of throughout training camp in the preseason, it may be tough to kind of justify him over Devin Harper, who I think, has been every bit as good on defense. I feel like is cheaper and is probably a better special teams player.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And that it's really going to come down to who's the better special teamer, because again, you're talking about the 4th linebacker on a team that uses 2 linebackers fewer than any other team in the league, right? Like the Cowboys are going to use a lot of 3 safety looks where Donovan Wilson's one of your safeties or J-Rod Curse. So they're just not going to go very deep at that position. So your third and fourth linebackers, they've really got to be special teams aces. The Cowboys lost Luke Gifford last year, who played in every single special teams unit.
Mm-hmm.
If you said it, if Jabril Cox can't find a role on special teams, I'm just not sure he's going to find a role in the 53.
And we've seen him on special teams. It's not like he hasn't. I mean, I think he's played on special teams, but to me, Harper is the ace. And if he's able to find footing on defense faster than Cox is able to find footing in special teams, it could be,
Well, and the other thing that we should mention, you mentioned the price, right? Devin Harper is just a lot cheaper because he was a 6th-round pick and Jabril Cox was a 4th-round pick. Also, look at the rookie contract, right? We're going on to year 3 of Jabril Cox, where Devin Harper, we're going on to year 2. So you can just kind of keep an extra year, right? Reset the rookie deal a little bit. So I think there is incentive. If it's close, you might just give the tie to the younger player that's healthier and a little bit cheaper.
Yeah. And again, like there's also tons of other guys out there. So if the Cowboys decide that neither of these guys are what they want, they can go out and find someone. But I think, Overshown being a hit right away really put a lot of pressure on these other down roster linebackers. And I think it's going to be interesting to see exactly how that all gets sorted out.
We're running out of time here, but I just want to mention, we talked about cornerbacks. Eric Scott struggled a little bit in this game. We can get into that, but I also want to ask you about the safeties, because Marquise Bell played almost every snap in this game. He led the Cowboys in defensive snaps, but it was Wanye Thomas who was the guy that got the interception on the first drive of the game. That's had the better camp so far. They can't keep all of these safeties with Israel Mukamu as the number 4. How do you see this shaking out?
I just can't see them cutting either Bell or Thomas, honestly. Like, I just think
keep 6 safeties.
Maybe, I think you could probably go short at cornerback, honestly, if you needed to, because Mukamu could play corner if you need him to. I don't know. I mean,
but that means
going to be a very difficult cut down.
But
honestly.
that means, because at corner you've got Diggs, Gilmore, Bland, and then it's Jordan Lewis if he comes back.
I think
Elvin
Lewis
Joseph.
is going on a list, right? Don't you think that? Like,
the further that we get into camp with him not practicing, it feels more likely like that happens.
Like, he's not even in pads when he's doing his cord stuff. I imagine he ends up on a list. So you list him. You probably keep Joseph. You probably find a way to milk this Nahshon Wright injury a little bit longer.
Although Nahshon Wright might not let you do that. I think he knows that his job is on the line, right?
And look, we got to start talking about Josh Butler, who was number 40 on the team. Had a really good game during the preseason game. So the depth chart down there is getting a little crazy. And then obviously when you combine them both with defensive backs, you want to keep 15 of these guys, but you just can't. So cut down for that position is going to be extremely interesting.
And I know the Cowboys would love to keep Eric Scott like on the practice squad, because there's obviously some talent there. They traded up to go get him. They gave up a future pick to go get him. And he's had a great OTAs, a good mini camp, but training camp has been a little bit up and down. Obviously did not play well in the preseason game. Do you risk exposing him to the waiver wire in a league that is so
needs corners?
Yeah, right? It's so talent deficient at corner. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to make it work in the secondary, because they just have too many good players.
Yeah, the Cowboys are going to be watched like hawks for defensive backs and pass rushers. So I don't know how many of those guys are going to sneak past waiver wires.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Again, everydayers, we'll be back tomorrow to break down practice, so make sure you tune in for that. We go check out our shows on YouTube. We post a show every single day over there. We're available wherever you get your podcasts, free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter @McCoolBCB. I'm @Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you next time.